Dumbass Tests and a Steady Date. Written by ice-cream-kitsunegirl. On Tumblr and archive of our own. God, you hated tests. You were a terrible test taker and you were pretty sure that you had test anxiety too. You never felt prepared even after you studied or did last-minute cramming. And the tests at UA with Aizawa were currently some of the worst ones you've had to take, unless they were physical tests that you could hold your own. Exams always made you feel stupid. Aizawa's written ones especially did, but your classmates made you feel even worse, especially Yaoyorozu or Ida. Even Bakugo was a genius, and that really surprised you. You should have studied with Yaoyorozu, but your pride wouldn't allow it. Instead, you asked Midoriya. He was much more approachable. You weren't a bad student per se. You barely made the cut as the 10th highest ranking student during the written midterms. You just struggled on some questions more than the others did, and you had a habit of taking your time, triple checking all your answers and then doubting yourself before you turned in all you had. This worked for the most part since your grades were decent enough. You would do just fine once you finished this test. It was the last class of the day, and Aizawa allowed students to leave when they had finished. It was all down to just Aoyama, Ashido, Kaminari, and yourself. You were glad that you weren't the only one who struggled, until you spotted Aoyama stand from his desk and make his way to the front of the class. I knew I should have studied more, you thought. Cramming worked a little better for you. It wasn't the most productive or healthy way of doing it, but you just weren't a good studier. Quietly sighing heavily, you focus on the last question. You cringed when you saw fearful Ashido standing up from her desk. She sighed before slowly making her way over to Aizawa and turned in her paper. Sorry, she mouthed the word to you once she was finished and exited the classroom, leaving only Kaminari and yourself with a waiting Aizawa. Nervousness began to brew. It was all down to the two of you, with not very many minutes left to spare and a question you were still stuck on. You have 10 minutes left, Aizawa added as a reminder. It just served to make you all the more nervous. Why couldn't you just write down the answer? You were sure of the correct one. Curiously, you looked over to where Kaminari sat. He looked just as stressed as you did, staring nervously at his paper with his pencils shaking in his hand, contemplating on what to write down. His eyes turned to look over at you, causing you to return back to your paper. You felt a heat in your cheeks, and you couldn't tell whether it was the exam or Kaminari that was causing it. You glanced over at him again, noticing that he was still staring at you. You gave him a sympathetic smile, and he couldn't help but nervously grin at you as your eyes locked with his. There was a moment of camaraderie between the both of you. You had observed that Kaminari wasn't the best test taker himself, and apparently he was the one who scored the lowest in the midterm exams, behind Ashido. You felt bad for him, but despite whatever rankings you were placed, you were still slow in completing tests. Kaminari winked at you. You flashed him a coy smile, the heat refusing to leave your head. Eyes on your papers, Aizawa gruffly said, noticing the two of you paying more attention to each other than the minutes left on the clock. Both Kaminari and yourself perked in surprise before you returned to your exam. Sighing heavily, you wrote your final answer, quickly double-checking everything through all your papers and stealing glances at Kaminari every now and then. There were 5 minutes left. It was time for your triple check, but you looked over at Kaminari, who reluctantly wrote down his last answer with a very anxious look on his face. You stood from your desk to hand in your papers, leaving Kaminari behind. Still, with only a few minutes on the clock left, you decided to wait outside the classroom doors for him. It wasn't long until the dispirited Kaminari slowly made his way out of the classroom. He turned to you, surprised that you were still here. Oh, hey, he grinned, almost as if his thoughts of the exam had dissipated from his mind. Hey, Kaminari. So, that test, huh? He asked quickly. I know, right? It was horrible. I barely knew what the last one was. You sighed heavily, much to his amusement. That's how I felt. I already kinda tanked it during midterms and the final exams, so I tried my hardest on this one. Kaminari admitted with a sheepish grin and a shrug. In fact, to be honest, I've never really been good at taking tests. Like at all. He added, and grinned nervously. Me neither. I normally score well enough to get by, but I still hate it. Call it test anxiety, I guess. You candidly admitted. I hear that. I just, I just act like my dopey self and let people think little tests don't get to me, but tests still make me a little uneasy. Hey, you just want to do your best. And then there's the pressure to do well. You can study as much as you want, but then sometimes you just forget. I know what that's like. You smiled sympathetically. Kaminari appreciated your words. He didn't want to admit calling it anxiety, but he was glad to hear it from someone else. Look on the bright side. These tests can't properly test a person's intelligence. All they do is test if you read a section in a book not many people have even read. What's that gonna do for us? You asked with a shrug. Kaminari's casual grin returned and his face lit up at the thought. Hey, you're right. I mean, sure, I still gotta score well, but you're right. Not like I'm gonna need something like math to beat up a villain. He snickered. Just the sight of his cheerful self made you giggle. No one's an idiot just because you don't pass a test. Like this. I just want to go home and save the world later, if someone's in trouble. You said it. Kaminari laughed happily, giving you the biggest smile you had ever seen from him. But, hey, maybe next time we have another test, you and I can, maybe, have a study date. Walking beside him, you noticed Kaminari sheepishly looking away from you, his demeanor coy and bashful. Yeah, I'm totally down for a study date, you exclaimed. Kaminari turned to you surprised. His pace slowed as he stared at you in disbelief. You looked to Kaminari, wondering if you've accidentally short-circuited something inside him. Hello? Oh, yeah, perfect! Yeah, it's a date then! Kaminari's cheerfulness returned instantaneously, and you couldn't help but smile at his energy. You didn't mind Kaminari walking closely next to you as you made your way back to the dorms, but slowly you felt Kaminari's hand reach out for yours, his pinky brushing against your palm. You returned in kind, reaching your fingers out towards his hand before they made their way into his palm. His hand engulfed yours, his fingers intertwined. Never in your life had you been happier to have almost finished last on a test.